Hi, I'm Gracie from The Rooted Hearth, and if you're new here, I'm on my journey to my forever homestead. And on the way there, I have a lot to learn. And lately I've been learning about bees. And you may be wondering, are you gonna start beekeeping this year? And the answer is no. Two big reasons. One, I don't feel like I have a large enough knowledge base so that I could do it and do it with like good intention. As well as like my intentions this year are really focused on my garden. But then two, where I live, while we can have apiaries, there is a minimum lot size and our lot is too small. And with that, my lot is so small that I couldn't keep the hive safe for my dogs or my dogs safe from the inhabitants of the hive. So that is why I'm not pursuing it this year. I am pursuing learning about it because there's a wealth of knowledge I need to master in order that my first hive, that first year in beekeeping, I can do it well. Also, there are things I can do to support other beekeepers and bees in general without actually having a hive. So that's what I'm doing. In late 2022, so you know, like a month ago, I was passed on a flyer about a Beekeeping 101 class through the ISU extension. It was a free class, it was in my town, so of course I'm gonna go. It was roughly 2 hours, or it was supposed to be. It did run long, but it was just so informative. And so I'm gonna share with you what I learned there. I will continue to take classes like this. I also have an acquaintance that does beekeeping, and he says he's happy to like sit down with me and talk more about it. Interesting fact about him, he made, I don't know, like 300 pounds of honey this year, which is crazy. So yeah, to start with, the presenter, who was a master beekeeper, not a thing I knew about, he talked about the history of bees and like why they are important. One of the things I didn't know is bees are one of 11 species that have been around since the dinosaurs, which is amazing. Also that they have such a huge impact on agriculture and food production that 1 in 3 bites of food we take was influenced by a bee, which is fascinating. I don't think it's news to anyone that bees are a species that are declining, and we need to protect them, not only for the health of our local environments and those ecosystems, but for ourselves, because they do have such a huge impact on food production and how we eat. So it's a really crucial thing. So from there, he talked about like bee basics and like how many apiaries are in the area. I live in Iowa, and there he said that we are roughly 25th in the nation for registered apiaries. Apiary is just a beehive, and to be very specific, an apiary can be 1 beehive or it can be hundreds of beehives. It just means that area has bees, maintained bees. So we're 25th in the nation, so dead center, dead center for people keeping bees. And why that's important is because, if you will, feral bees are not really a thing, especially in Iowa. So if there are going to be bees around, it's normally somebody keeping them. You do not have to register your bee hives in Iowa, but if you do, there are some benefits like being able to communicate with local farmers about the pesticides they use. The presenter also talked about like the life cycle of a bee. I did not know this, but apparently queens can live 5 to 6 years, but the older they get, the less they produce. So commercial beekeepers will tend to cull their queens, which is really interesting. And then each bee type, if you will, so there's queens, workers, drones, have different gestation periods, and the queen decides what type of bees they're going to produce based on the pheromones and what the hive needs, which is really, really interesting. The longest gestation of the bees are drones at 24 days, followed by worker bees at 21 days, and then the queens just gestate for 16 days. And that makes a lot of sense when you consider how important the role of the queen is. If they were to lose a queen, then they need to replace her really quickly for the health of the hive. Another interesting thing I learned, and I'm probably going to make myself look like a fool here, is a while ago I learned that the only type of bee that makes honey is a honeybee, because of course it is. But then in this class I learned there are multiple types of honeybees. So there you go. There are 7 at least that he showed us. And I did not know that like when you get into beekeeping, you typically choose a type of bee. And there's a lot of factors that can go into it, like how aggressive they are, how much honey they produce, how well they stand up to things like mites and disease. But typically, and I'm going to mispronounce this name, most first-time beekeepers go with one of 2, the Carnelian, again, probably mispronounced, and then the Italian. And what he told me was that this is largely due to the fact that they are a friendlier bee species and less aggressive. The most aggressive bee species, honeybee species, is the Africanized ones, but they're, interestingly enough, some of the hardiest and stand up to disease and mites better than some of the others. So really, really interesting. When you start beekeeping, you need to think about like the structure you're going to put them in. There are several types of structures, from like historical ones that look like domes, to ones that look like just a little trough of bees, to what is known as, or to what is the most popular, which is the ring straw. And he went into like the history of Langstroth and how like that came, and the most interesting thing about that was like this concept of bee space, which that concept I've become obsessed with and have like made doodles to like put on bags and all this stuff. So essentially the space between the frames needs to be roughly 1 centimeter. And the reason for that is enough space for the bees to like move around, and it's not so wide that they're going to start building out. So the concept of bee space is very important. So, you know, if you're going to be a beekeeper, mind the bee space. So he crafted what is considered the modern day hive, the Langstroth hive. It's the hive you think of when you think of beehives. So once you have the hive you're going to use, then you're going to order your bees. And you'll choose your breed, Italian, Africanized, whatever strikes your fancy. And then you'll order it. And you can, well, I won't say order it. You can obtain bees one of 3 ways. The first 2 is ordering them. You can get a nuke, which is set up with your bees and your frames and all that, and you just have to transfer it into your hive. You can get a package, which is literally a box of bees. I think it's 3 pounds if I remember right, and a queen. And you go through the process and you dump the bees into your hive. There are no frames, it's literally a box of bees. And then the third way you can get bees is actually catching a swarm. Swarming is a very common practice that bees do to essentially like make new hives. If a hive or bees become too many for the hive, a section of them split off to make a new hive. So you can catch swarms by providing a space, so typically an empty hive, and then like scenting it with different things. I don't remember the things he recommended, but you keep that out there. More than likely in the summer, you'll catch a swarm somehow. Aside from that, you're gonna need 3 things. One is a hive tool. To me, they look like little crowbars, but there's several different types. Doesn't really matter, but You use it to like pry open the box, to scrape things off. It's kind of an everything tool. A smoker, he did say some people don't use smokers. He fancied them, but it's a way to maintain your bees so you can get in them. Interesting fact, I thought the smoke made the bees sleepy. And that's not quite right. Apparently it makes them agitated. And when they're agitated, they want to leave to be protective and whatnot. And so like, if you're like fleeing your home and you don't know if you'll ever be back, you're gonna grab what's most important to you. And for bees, that is honey. And so they eat so that, you know, they'll have resources. And like when they realize that you're not there to like wipe out the hive or you're not a giant bear, they're kind of like, okay, we can stay, but they just had a big meal. And so it kind of makes them sluggish, which is, I guess, a really long way to describe essentially the same emotional state for the bee. They're slower and they're less likely to sting you. And then protective gear. Some beekeepers don't wear it. I imagine as a new beekeeper, I will, because like being stung is a thing that people don't want. Even though I learned that it is recommended that beekeepers get stung roughly 200 times a year, so that it's less likely that they'll develop an allergy, which is baffling to me. So yeah, that is essentially the gist of like getting up and running. He shared a lot about like good spots to put hives and making sure it's a legal hive. Again, couldn't have one at my house because our lot is too small. One of the things we mentioned with the types of bees was how likely they are to make it through the winter. And when I was at the class, I already heard people talk about like they tried beekeeping for the last 2 years and they've never had a hive survive the winter. The person leading the class said that only 45% of hives will make it through the winter. Which feels like a very defeating thing. Like you're gonna go into this and be like, more likely this is gonna fail. So I guess if you do start and your bees don't make it through the hive winter, par for the course. Lots of things can go wrong, from like too much moisture, not enough food, mite infestations, and sometimes you just don't really understand like what led to your hive dying that winter. You do have to feed the bees, especially if you are taking the honey from them, because that is how they make it through the winter, and roughly you're just providing them sugar. But you need to keep in mind like what's around you and like inspect the honey of your hives too. He showed us some interesting pictures of like a red filled frame that apparently those bees were going to a factory that made some sort of like sugary thing, like gummy bears or something. And so their honey was influenced by that. And then he also showed us a green one, and those bees were going to an antifreeze factory, which kind of brings up a good point. If you're gonna have a hive, you need to make sure that there's enough resources in the area for the bees to live off of. We're talking water and we're talking pollen. So I was curious as to like, well, how far out can like do the bees go? Like, where do I need to be looking to make sure they have enough? Hopefully on my acreage, I'll just have enough planted myself, but some people are urban beekeepers or backyard beekeepers. And so it's not necessarily just your land. You have to be considered about maybe looking around. And so bees can fly apparently for 2 miles. That's not to say you should look within 2 miles, but roughly like half of that, because you have to figure the bee has to fly to the spot and then come back. And ideally the food and the water will be as close as possible to the hive. And that kind of brings me to like how someone who doesn't have bees can be helpful to other people. Be helpful to people who do have bees, or just natural pollinators in general. And that is like having a yard that is pollinator friendly. More and more we're learning that these like clean grass yards, well kept, aren't pollinator friendly. And so even just like having florals and whatnot can be really helpful. But having native plants to the area is even better. You can order seeds for pollinator friendly plants, which I will be doing this year. I tried to grow natives last year. My dogs are very good tramplers, and so they did not make it, but we'll be making them dog safe this year. So I'll be planting pollinator friendly species in my yard so that they can come get what they need. I'll also be building a bee watering hole. You can't just put out a bowl of water because the bees will drown. So you need to put little like landing areas, pebbles, rocks, things like that in the water so that they have a place to land, drink, and then go on. And then also watching what you use on your yard as far as pesticides. I'm not a very big pesticide person. In general, like I'm more of a let the bugs be bugs. Occasionally you have to intervene for the sake of your house. But when you're choosing different chemicals to use, whether it's to fertilize your lawn or take care of pests and whatnot, making sure what you're using is bee friendly. So that way it is very unlikely that you are going to kill a bunch of bees because you're taking care of your lawn. And so those are some ways that you too could be supportive of beekeepers and the bee population in general. There was so much more in that class. Like I said, it was 2.5 hours long. I was literally riveted. I was in a class of people listening. They seemed very interested, but I'm like scribbling notes. And so I'm really glad I went to it. It makes me want to learn more, and I will continue to. I'm gonna meet up with that acquaintance of mine. I'll hopefully shadow other beekeepers and whatnot. But it was a very good introductory way to start learning about bees, besides, you know, just the generic stuff you grow up learning about them. So that's it. If you want to hang around and learn more about bees with me, or learn about the other things I'm going to be learning, for instance, I'm going to learn about keeping chickens in a couple weeks. Hang around, hit subscribe, boop that like button, and if you want, tell me the most interesting thing you ever learned about a bee down below. Until then, I'll see you later. Scott, you know the answer to this. How many bees are in half a cup?
200.
That is correct.